This setup is not producing relief, it is producing repetition. People with solid incomes are staying financially tight year after year. Paychecks arrive, bills clear, and nothing accumulates. Vehicles get newer, payments get longer, pressure stays the same. If the system worked, unused money would appear over time. It does not. Look at the pattern. Transportation costs rise, yet flexibility shrinks. Income increases are absorbed before they can change outcomes. Disruptions still cause stress. Decisions remain reactive. That is not a motivation problem. That is a structural output. A functional setup creates margin. Margin absorbs variance. Margin compounds. The absence of margin means the structure resets to zero every cycle. When that happens, progress becomes impossible, regardless of effort. This is why the experience feels confusing. On paper, things look fine. Payments are current, credit remains intact, nothing collapses, but nothing improves. The system survives, and that becomes the ceiling. When a household operates this way, time becomes the enemy. Each month reinforces the same exposure. Each year passes without traction. The longer it runs, the harder it becomes to change because fixed costs harden around income. This is not about taste, discipline, or deserving. It is about how the structure behaves under normal conditions. A setup that requires uninterrupted income to feel stable is not stable. A setup that leaves no unused capacity after costs cannot move forward. If you recognize this pattern, it is because the pattern is common, not successful. Common. The next step is not reassurance. The next step is to identify the rule that produces this outcome. The entire structure rests on one assumption. If the monthly payment fits, the car is affordable. That sentence governs how most vehicles are purchased. It appears reasonable because it is reinforced everywhere. Dealerships present payments, not totals. Advertisements highlight what fits per month. Loan terms stretch until the number looks manageable. The decision feels controlled because the obligation appears contained. This is why the setup spreads so easily. It does not feel reckless. It feels responsible. Bills are paid on time. The payment clears each month. There is no immediate penalty for agreeing to it. The system rewards compliance in the short term. But once that assumption is accepted, everything downstream is forced to serve it. Loan length expands to protect the payment. Trade-ins are structured to preserve the payment. Insurance, fuel, and maintenance are treated as background costs because they do not appear on the same screen. The payment becomes the gatekeeper. If it passes, the decision passes. This way of operating quietly removes the only question that matters. Not whether the obligation fits this month, but whether it changes the direction of the household over time. When the payment is treated as the test, the long-term result is never evaluated. After the assumption is installed, the structure runs automatically. Each decision reinforces the same rule. Each purchase is justified using the same logic. The system feels consistent, even when the outcome is stagnant. From this point forward, it is not necessary to repeat the assumption. The behavior makes it visible. Vehicles are chosen by monthly tolerance. Obligations are extended into the future. Flexibility is traded for appearance of control. This is not a character flaw. It is the predictable result of using the wrong test for affordability. The next step is to examine why this approach fails even when income is sufficient. This approach fails because it converts a declining asset into a fixed obligation. A vehicle loses value every year. The payment does not. When the loan is extended, the mismatch widens. The obligation remains constant, while the asset underneath it shrinks. This is not a flaw in execution. It is how the structure behaves. Longer terms do not reduce cost. They redistribute it across time. What looks like relief is exposure moved forward. The payment becomes easier to tolerate, but the duration expands. The total commitment grows even as the object itself becomes less useful and less valuable. Once this structure is in place, flexibility disappears. Fixed costs consume capacity first. Variable expenses adjust around them. When disruption occurs, there is no buffer to absorb it because the system was built to operate at full utilization. Negative equity emerges naturally from this setup. The loan balance declines slower than the asset value. Trading the vehicle early does not resolve the gap, it transfers it. The shortfall is rolled into the next obligation, increasing the baseline cost of participation. Each cycle hardens the structure. More income is required just to maintain the same position. Progress becomes conditional on future earnings rather than current surplus. The system no longer creates options. It demands continuity. None of this requires poor decision-making. It only requires adherence to the payment rule. When decisions are filtered through monthly tolerance instead of total impact, the outcome is fixed. The failure is mechanical. Fixed obligations tied to depreciating assets produce fragility. Over time, that fragility becomes normal. The household learns to operate under constant pressure and mistakes endurance for success. To remove debate, the numbers need to be visible. Remove opinion and look at one conservative example. A truck is purchased for $55,000. The loan runs for 7 years at a modest interest rate. The monthly payment lands around $800. That number feels manageable, especially compared to a shorter term with a higher payment. Over 7 years, those payments total roughly $67,000. That figure only represents the loan. It does not include the costs required to keep the vehicle operational. Insurance for a vehicle at that price commonly runs around $250 per month. Over 7 years, that adds another $21,000. Fuel costs average roughly $350 per month for a typical commute and normal use. Over 7 years, that adds approximately $29,000. Maintenance and repairs for a modern truck over that time frame routinely exceed $15,000, even without major failures. Add the numbers. Loan payments, insurance, fuel, maintenance. The total cash outflow exceeds $130,000. At the end of 7 years, the vehicle is no longer new. Its value has declined sharply. In favorable conditions, it may be worth $15,000. Subtract the remaining value from the total cash outflow. The difference is not transportation cost. It is consumption. It is money that did not accumulate, did not compound, and cannot be recovered. The payment felt affordable because it passed the monthly test. The outcome fails the long-term test. The math does not bend to preference, justification, or effort. Once this calculation is visible, the debate ends. Affordability, defined by payment, obscures scale. Affordability, defined by total impact, exposes it. The next step is to examine what repeating this structure produces over time. When this structure stays in place, the outcome does not explode. It settles. Months pass with income flowing in and obligations flowing out. The balance reaches zero and resets. Savings attempts stall because surplus never stabilizes. Progress is postponed, not denied outright, which makes it easier to tolerate. Years move this way quietly. The household remains functional but constrained. Decisions are filtered through existing obligations rather than long-term direction. Any disruption, a repair, a job change, a medical bill, forces trade-offs because there is no unused capacity to absorb it. This is how dependence on future income forms. Current stability relies on continuity. Missing one paycheck creates immediate pressure. Unexpected costs require borrowing. Flexibility becomes conditional. The longer this continues, the harder it is to reverse. Fixed costs anchor lifestyle decisions. Housing, work, and even relationships adapt around the obligation. The structure becomes normal, not because it works, but because it is familiar. Nothing collapses, so nothing triggers urgency. The absence of visible failure is mistaken for success, but accumulation does not occur. Net worth grows slowly, or not at all. Opportunity remains theoretical. This is not a temporary phase. It is a trajectory. Repeating the same structure produces the same result, regardless of effort or intention. The question is not whether this feels manageable. The question is whether it moves anything forward. The next step is to replace the rule that keeps this system running. The problem does not resolve by trying harder within the same structure. It resolves by changing the constraint that governs decisions. Here is the replacement. A car is not affordable unless money accumulates faster after it than before it. This is not a guideline. It is a filter. If the purchase causes surplus to slow, disappear, or reverse, it fails the test, regardless of how comfortable the payment feels. This constraint immediately changes how decisions are evaluated. Monthly tolerance is no longer relevant on its own. The question becomes whether the vehicle increases or decreases unused capacity over time. If the answer is negative, the structure does not work. This is why payment-focused thinking collapses under this rule. A payment can fit while accumulation dies. Comfort in the short term does not override direction in the long term. The constraint is non-negotiable because it measures output, not intent. It does not ask whether the purchase feels justified. It asks whether the system produces forward motion after costs are applied. Once this rule is installed, many options remove themselves automatically. Vehicles that require justification from future income fail immediately. Trades that rely on rolling obligations forward fail. Decisions that feel reasonable under monthly framing collapse under accumulation framing. This is not restraint. It is alignment. A structure that accumulates creates flexibility. A structure that does not accumulate creates dependency. The next step is to translate this constraint into a practical decision rule set. Once the constraint is in place, decisions stop being ambiguous. The rules become clear. First rule: if a vehicle increases fixed monthly costs, it increases fragility. Fixed costs consume capacity before anything else. When they grow, flexibility shrinks. A structure that hardens expenses cannot adapt. Second rule: if a purchase delays surplus, it is optional. Surplus is not a reward, it is a requirement. Any decision that postpones unused money pushes stability further away. Third rule: if a decision requires future income to justify it, it fails. A system that depends on tomorrow to support today is already exposed. Progress must come from current margin, not optimistic forecasts. These rules eliminate negotiation. They remove the gray area that monthly payment framing creates. They make dealership conversations irrelevant because the criteria no longer align with how vehicles are sold. The decision shifts from taste to output, not what feels reasonable now, but what produces capacity later. Vehicles become utilities again. Transportation returns to its function rather than its symbolism. Under this rule set, fewer choices pass. That is not deprivation. That is clarity. Options that failed the test were never affordable. They were tolerated. The next step is execution. Structure without action produces awareness, not change. This does not require a lifestyle overhaul. It requires visibility. First, calculate the full cost of transportation as a system, not a payment. Add loan payments, insurance, fuel, maintenance, and repairs. Use a full year. Do not estimate monthly comfort. Record actual cash leaving. Second, identify how much surplus exists after transportation costs. Not projected, not hoped for. Actual unused money that remains consistently. If the number fluctuates or disappears, the structure is exposed. Third, compare that surplus to net worth movement. If income has increased but net worth has not, transportation is consuming capacity. The vehicle is not a neutral tool, it is an active drag. This exercise forces a reset. It replaces abstraction with measurement. It removes negotiation. The numbers do not argue back. No apps are required. No optimization tactics are necessary. A single sheet of paper or a simple note is sufficient. The goal is not precision. The goal is clarity. Once the full cost is visible, decisions become easier. The system either produces accumulation or it does not. If it does not, something must change. That change can be delayed, but delay preserves the current outcome. The next section addresses the reasons people hesitate to act even after the numbers are clear. Once the structure is visible, resistance follows a familiar pattern. One objection is reliability. The assumption is that higher cost equals fewer problems. In practice, reliability is tied to maintenance and design, not price. Many lower-cost vehicles deliver dependable transportation without consuming future capacity. Price signals status more reliably than performance. Another objection is reward. The vehicle is framed as compensation for effort. But fixed obligations do not reward effort. They convert it into maintenance. A reward that delays freedom is not a reward. It is a trade. A third objection is timing. The belief that the structure is temporary, that income will rise or circumstances will change. This preserves the current setup. Future relief is used to justify present exposure. The outcome does not change because the rule does not change. These objections do not require argument. They repeat because they work. They protect comfort. They delay confrontation. Recognizing them removes their authority. The system does not respond to intention. It responds to structure. Until the structure changes, the result repeats. The final step is not encouragement. It is a decision. There are only two paths from here. One path keeps the structure exactly as it is. Payments remain the test. Obligations expand to fit income. Surplus appears briefly and disappears. Stability depends on continuity. Years pass without accumulation. Nothing breaks, and nothing improves. The other path replaces the structure. Transportation becomes a controlled utility. Fixed costs shrink. Surplus stabilizes. Decisions slow because urgency fades. Income gains translate into capacity instead of maintenance. This is not a motivational choice. It is an operational one. The system will continue to produce whatever the structure allows. Comfort does not change that. Intention does not change that. The rule is already clear. A purchase is only affordable if money accumulates faster after it than before it. Everything else is negotiation. If the structure changes, the outcome changes. If it does not, the result repeats. There is no third option. There is a pause after realizing something like this. No rush to fix everything. No sudden urge to reorganize your life. Just a quiet clarity. You may think about the payment you have now, or the one you almost accepted, or the last time a decision felt reasonable in the moment and restrictive later. That pause matters. It is where different outcomes begin. This channel is not here to tell you what to buy, what app to use, or how to optimize every dollar. It exists to surface the rules people are already living by, and to show what those rules actually produce over time. If this changed how you look at affordability, not emotionally, but structurally, stay close. We will continue breaking down the setups that quietly shape financial lives, not with motivation, not with hacks, with clarity. One rule at a time, one structure at a time.